And you're live.
Good morning, everyone. It's the one and only Senor Silverback V, the gorilla in the economist, coming to you on another special hanging with Harley. The man has been very, very busy. He couldn't make it last week because he was in the thick of things. And today, without further ado, we have him back on. Harley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, V. It's good to talk to you again.
It's great talking to you, my friend. I know you've been busy. You've been within the halls of power. What is the latest and greatest? What's on your radar, sir?
Well, there are two things to look at. The first is the unraveling of the existing system, which I can come to in a moment.
Mm.
But I think it's important for people to take a step back and realize how dramatically the world has changed over the last weeks. Now, we were told that Trump was going to go in and smash China. And then we find this very beautiful little vignette of his granddaughter singing in Mandarin Chinese at the Chinese embassy for the Chinese Lunar New Year. Then we see that Kushner and Ivanka are talking to the Chinese. Then we see that Trump sent a letter to Xi Jinping, which was very well received in China. And
Nice.
the Chinese have now invited Trump to attend the next meeting of the One Belt, One Road conference that's taking place in Beijing in May.
Wow.
Now, this is an important event
Mm.
because even the New York Times today was forced to acknowledge, or yesterday, that the Chinese are doing tremendous work in Africa. They've just completed the link from Djibouti to Addis Ababa. And the Ethiopian economy will start booming even more than it is now by having a sea link through Djibouti. This is a 450-mile rail operation. It was done in 6 years for $4 billion. And the New York Times says the Africans are ecstatic about it. And they quote the port minister in Djibouti, who said, "We talked to the Americans have no vision. The Chinese came in, the Chinese have vision."
Right.
Now, today Trump is meeting in Florida with Abe, the Japanese prime minister. Abe has backed up the Chinese offers by his own offer. He said he could put forward somewhere in the range of $5 to $10 billion from the Japanese pension funds for investment in high-speed rail in the United States. The Chinese have made an offer even more than that. And so we see this diplomacy taking place at a very high level, personal diplomacy, while the media is tying itself in knots over these court cases involving the immigration ban. So, you have an elite which is completely flustered, completely out of sorts. They can't seem to get their game back. And they're saying, you can't say worse stuff about Trump. I mean, the current issue of Spiegel magazine, the leading magazine in Germany, has a cover with Trump holding the bloody, severed head of the Statue of Liberty in one hand and a knife dripping with blood in the other hand. And it's called Nero Trump, the dangerous American president. And The Economist this week has a picture of Trump on the cover throwing a Molotov cocktail.
Yeah.
And it says, "How can Europe survive Trump?" So you have this idiocy coming from defeated people who are just not used to losing.
Right.
And the American people are still somewhat confused, I think. They're hoping Trump will do some things. Many of them are starting to say, gee, is this the right thing? Don't read the damn US press.
Correct.
Stick with rogue money. Stick with whatever source you have outside of the mainstream. But realize the world is changing dramatically.
Correct.
Actually, one other thing quickly, just in terms of a preface, even Radio Free Europe has identified the fighting in eastern Ukraine as being caused by the Kiev government, Poroshenko's government, because he's afraid that Trump is going to work with the Russians and Ukraine will be left on its own. Now, of course, Ukraine has a couple of great friends who can help them, namely John McCain and Lindsey Graham.
AKA Mr. and Mrs. John McCain.
Yes, Mr. and Mrs. John McCain. And they were on the border watching the Poroshenko forces firing artillery into the Donbass region. So, I think this change is so dramatic that Americans just aren't ready for it, and
Right.
they should be because it's happening.
Right, absolutely. And the worst part is those two idiots were out there, and did you read what they were saying? They were literally saying, "We're on your side. This is your moment. We will punish Russia together. It's time for you to go on the offensive." I mean, these guys are crazy.
Reminds me of the old days when the Albanian government said the 801 million united people of China and Albania reject Western imperialism. McCain and what army is going to challenge Putin?
Yeah.
Now, the
Unbelievable.
other thing that's important to note, I was in Brussels for a couple of days. I was in Frankfurt for a couple of days. And Frankfurt, as you know, is the financial capital of Europe. Brussels is the political capital. The two
Yeah.
places are brain dead. I mean, Brussels, the European Parliament is like a giant rat's nest. It's sort of a cross between high school and a rat's nest. People running around in the halls being very self important, talking to each other, signifying nothing. The
Yeah.
European Parliament is doing nothing. It all is being done by the European Council, which is controlled by these non elected fools that Nigel Farage has such great fun provoking.
Right.
The good thing is, within the European Parliament, you have a growing group of people who are calling themselves sovereigntists. And I met with a group of people from Italy, Italian members of the European Parliament. And they're pulling together a left center and a right center coalition,
Yeah.
which is anti Euro and which is pro Glass Steagall.
Nice.
And together they add up to about 40% of the vote in Italy. Now, in Italy, that's called a majority.
Mm.
So what they've got to do now is move it a little further, but they're up from about 26% a year ago. And they're prepared to challenge Italy's presence in the euro. And this would be extremely big. So, there are people who are serious there. I ran into one person, Hans Olaf Hankel, who's fairly well known as used to be the chief economist for the Industrial Association of Germany. And I said, so how much longer do you think the euro is going to last? And he said, it's already outlived its life expectancy.
Wow.
And what he said is that he's just not sure that there's anything that can be done to save it. And I said, no, we have to save the nations. That's why we're for Glass-Steagall. And he said, oh, well, my new party is also for Glass-Steagall. So we're seeing a growing awakening there.
Right.
But, on the surface, it's basically zombies defending zombie banks.
Right. Right. Absolutely correct. It's the Titanic and the Lusitania are both sinking together.
Well, and today there was a report that came out from the Eurofund, which is the statistical division of the EU. And what they report is half of the new jobs created since 2010 have been temporary in Europe. So it's very much like the so-called Obama recovery. 40% of Europe's millennial generation are in low-paid and temporary work. In France, 80% of the new jobs in the last 2 years are temporary. So you see this collapse of the real economy throughout the transatlantic, and then you contrast that to what the Chinese are doing now in Africa, in Asia, and Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Abe of Japan are holding out the olive branch to Trump, saying, let's work together on this. So I'm very optimistic that we can get some, as Trump would say, get some deals done.
Yeah.
But he's going to have to deal with the neocons and the Goldman Sachs and the Soros crowd that are inside the tent, you might say, with Mnuchin at Treasury, Cohen at the Advisory Council, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, man, and there's definitely some great changes ahead, without a doubt, Harley.
And I think you see it from the other side, the hysteria. Robert Kagan has a new piece out comparing Russia and China today to Japan and Germany in the 1930s.
Oh, that's always a smart thing to do. Take superpowers and vilify them. That always works out well.
Well, then he comes up with a real kicker, which is the U.S. is the only nation strong enough to confront them, and the U.S. must contain them. So once again, you say, Kagan, you and your wife and what army are going to do
Yeah,
that? Uh,
exactly.
there's a new sheriff in town, and he's not looking for a war.
No, no, absolutely not. These people. I don't know how much drugs or how much acid it takes to get somebody's brain to that level, Harley, where they're so devoid. They're just speaking into echo chambers. That's exactly what these guys are doing. They're forecasting into a bubble. They're speaking into an echo chamber, and they think that the world goes along with their idiotic ideas.
Well, and they're used to people doing that, but
Yeah,
it's changing now. You know, the other thing, I just wrote an article for our German paper on the Black Bloc that carried out this riot in
sure.
Berkeley.
Yeah,
And, you know, if you look at that, on the surface, it looks very much like the so-called Antifa movement in Germany, the so-called anti-fascist movement, which it
Mhm.
turns out was run by NATO under something called Operation Gladio.
Remember Gladio,
Yeah, this is a British-Israeli operation.
right?
But what you also see with the Black Bloc in the United States is Soros money. You know,
Sure.
in researching for this article, there's a report that Soros, this is from Soros's foundation's papers, that he gave $33 million in 2015 to groups like Black Lives Matter and to provoke uh, the worst kind of chaos in the United States. His foundation to promote open society has nearly $3 billion in assets that they're managing. So he's got all the resources he needs. But what I find very fascinating is this comment that Putin made a couple of weeks ago, where he said that what we're seeing now is an effort to organize a Maidan in
Yeah,
Washington, D.C., referring to the Maidan Square. And he says that the first goal was to keep Trump from assuming office. The second goal is to tie his hands so that he will not be able to implement any of his pre-election campaign promises. Now, the key to this Maidan analogy is that you need this black bloc, anarchists, chaos on the ground to allow for the real hardcore military option, or I should say, deep state option to come in and carry out assassinations and do the real dirty work.
right.
Uh, Hopefully, this is something that Trump is aware of. And if so, I think maybe he should follow Russia's lead of throwing Soros and his foundations out of the United States.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I'm hearing from the grapevine that there's going to be that Soros will be dealt with, which is also one of the reasons why Mnuchin was allowed to come into to the Treasury Department. There's an angle there, and what I've been told, Harlan, and I'll tell you this when we get off the air. There is another guy who's helping Soros, and I'm going to disclose that probably sometime this week in an article that I'm putting together. But I'll definitely tell you who that person is from a very high level source. Um, and this is the reason why that I mean, think about it. Soros spent billions trying to take out Putin. That's failed. Now he's spending billions trying to take out Trump, and it seems like he has unending money. He is receiving help and collateral here, and I'll definitely tell you. I mean,
Well, and
it's a
that's
huge effort.
and this is, these are the guys who are calling Trump a traitor for trying to negotiate diplomatic collaboration with Russia. I
Right.
thought what the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said the other day was really interesting. He said, we're moving from deconfliction in Syria, in other words, not shooting down each other's planes, to active cooperation and collaboration.
Good.
If you wipe out the terrorists and control the war, get rid of the war in the Middle East, you'll deal with the refugee problem in Europe because a
Yep.
lot of these people will go back. I'm in a German language class, which includes some of the refugees who are very serious students of German, but they say we want to get back to Syria.
Sure.
And you have this narrative of well, the problem is the refugees. Well, where did the refugees come from? This is Bush and Obama's doing. And I think on these things, Trump understands it. I hope, and I'm told that his son-in-law, Kushner, is one of the people who's targeting or honing in on Soros. I hope that's true because Soros represents one of the most important of the British hedge fund operators and dirty tricksters, a real thug. Now,
Yes.
one other thing, just to go back to the economy for a second. I don't know if you saw the interview with Bill Gross, formerly of PIMCO, the other.
Of PIMCO. No, I
Yeah.
missed that one.
Well, he said, sorry to tell you this, folks, but there's no escape from quantitative easing. He said, we can't get out of it. The system depends on it. And he described it as financial methadone. Now, if you think about that, he said there is a problem with this. The problem is they're running out of bonds to buy. So how are they going to keep the liquidity coming other than just completely doing nothing but running printing presses? And then you see the shift from low, so-called controlled inflation to runaway inflation. So I think this warning from Gross is interesting for people to contemplate.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very important. I mean, he is. I mean, there's some negative things he said, but yeah, overall, he's absolutely right. I mean, there's so much debt in the system. It has to be purged, Harley. I mean, a lot of people are coming out talking about this global economic reset. Uh, where do you think that's coming along?
Well, I think the only way you have a real reset is if you do write down the debt or write off the debt.
Yeah.
Now, on this, interesting thing, depending on how conspiratorial you are, and I know, V, you and your listeners tend to be quite open to hearing about these kinds of inside discussions.
Yes.
I have some friends who said, look, Trump did a real fake out of Jamie Dimon and others on this Dodd-Frank thing, because he's not going to be able to make the shift that he told them he would make on Dodd-Frank. The only thing he can do with Dodd-Frank is throw the whole thing out,
right,
which he should do. But that he's laying the basis for coming out in the next couple of weeks with Glass-Steagall. Now, this is an interesting point because there is growing sentiment for Glass-Steagall. If people go on the LaRouchePAC.com website, you'll see a very interesting press conference a week ago with Marcy Kaptur, who's been the promoter of the Glass-Steagall bills in the last three Congresses, with Walter Jones, a North Carolina Republican. But it also includes Tulsi Gabbard, who's probably one of the few Democrats with balls in the Congress.
Right.
And then Tim Ryan, who was the person who challenged Pelosi. And what did Marcy Kaptur say? She said, President Trump, we're with you in fighting Wall Street. We're with you. We want you to join us in Glass-Steagall. And so this is the way to overcome this partisan provocation coming from people like Elizabeth Warren, who if she really wanted Glass-Steagall, she could go to the White House and say, okay, let's do it, instead of posturing she wants Glass-Steagall and Trump's the problem. So these are, when you talk about shifts and changes, if Trump really wants to get to the core of the matter, Glass-Steagall is the way he takes the club out of the hands of Wall Street, does a real reset by forcing the debt to be eaten by the speculators.
Yes.
And then you can figure out how are we going to generate the credit, a national credit system to finance the infrastructure. Included among that money would be the money from the Chinese and Japanese. So you have a real connection to the Silk Road, to the Eurasian perspective. And that's also something that Putin is a supporter of.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely correct. What is going on in terms of I mean, we know about Abe. In terms of the latest news out of India, do you know anything that's going on over there? Then another major BRICS member seems to be things stabilized, or are they still in a heap?
Well, I think they're pretty stabilized because India has had a very good growth rate. Mm-hmm. There's obviously some monkeying around going on with the economy there, with the currency. I can't get a good reading on that, but yeah. I think underneath it all, you have to remember that India still has a very strong connection in banking to London.
Right.
This goes back to colonial times.
Sure.
Nehru and others tried to get rid of it. Mrs. Gandhi, look at what happened to that family. Indira Gandhi was killed by terrorists. Her son Rajiv was killed.
Yep.
We had quite a bit of destabilization there. But I think that the Indians will be at this Chinese conference coming up. The Indians are very solid in their commitment to the Silk Road and to the BRICS process. South Africa is coming back strongly. The one weakness in the BRICS now is Brazil,
Yeah.
and that's because the whole system there has been put under this so-called anti-corruption campaign, which is, of course, run by the most corrupt people of all, who are tied to the British monarchy.
Yeah. I mean, Michael Temer he's not even Brazilian.
Well, and he's, whatever they accuse Dilma of doing, he's got his arms in much deeper than she did.
Yeah.
So this is the way the world works. You make some steps, and then you watch the enemy come back and hit. And this time, I think the enemy doesn't have the same high ground they had in the past, and that's why you see so much hysteria. Even in the situation in Israel, after Netanyahu announced he's coming here and he expected he was going to get absolutely everything he wanted from Trump, the White House put out a statement saying, well, we don't think new settlements will be a stabilizing influence. And this was a blow to the solar plexus to Netanyahu. The done deal is not a done deal.
Right.
And in that sense, Trump is actually thinking strategically. He's obviously learned something from looking at the way Putin approaches the world. What LaRouche says is so unique about Putin is that he operates from this global strategic perspective.
Correct.
So he doesn't get bothered when a bunch of, I keep thinking of the movie The Mouse That Roared, a couple of Lilliputians like Lithuania and Latvia say, we're going to stand up to the Russian Empire. As if
or Mr. and Mrs. John McCain show up on the borders in the Ukraine.
Exactly. Or Poroshenko talks to Merkel and then comes back and says, we're not going to put up with this Russian invasion. And even Radio Free Europe says, there are no Russian tanks. There are no Russian troops. We've seen no movement from Russia into the Donbass.
Right. And what about Yanukovych, the crazy woman? Okay, the crazy woman, Yanukovych, who went over to go see Trump and was begging and pleading with him, and she got nothing in return.
Well, you have a lot of these people who don't recognize the shift and think that the old rules apply. That in the old days they could go to Obama and Obama would give a nice speech and then send some arms. Trump's not going to do that.
No.
And so under these circumstances, you can now deal with the situation. Romania is changing. Hungary is changing. Hungary is about to kick out Soros.
Yep.
Austria is shifting. But the big one is Italy. I don't think Americans appreciate that Italy is an economic power. It's been crippled by debt, which was forced on it by Deutsche Bank and Mario Draghi when he was with Goldman Sachs and then with the Italian finance ministry. But northern Italy is one of the most industrialized parts of the world.
Yeah.
Advanced machine tool, aerospace, and so on. And people in that part support the Lega Nord, which is at the center of this new coalition. They call themselves the Italian Trumpistas.
Nice.
And so you've got, and they say, let's make Italy great. Nice. And I ask them, why don't you say make Italy great again? And they say, well, the last time Italy was great was in the Renaissance when it wasn't Italy. It was just the city-states. So we want Italy to be great for the first time.
Very well said, Russell.
All over the country, and they're pulling together different groupings. So I met with someone from Greece when I was in Brussels, and I said, why did you guys stay in the euro? And he said, if we left, the debt would stay with us, and we'd get no credit, and we would starve. However, if Italy goes, we'll be on their coattails.
There you go. There you go. Very nice. And also Sweden. There's a major nationalistic movements rising in Sweden where they said, we want to make Sweden great again.
Well, I think what's happening is people in these different countries are beginning to realize it's not Trump, it's a global movement. Brexit is a part of it. The defeat of Renzi was a part of it. Trump is a big part of it. But it's a rejection of the old, arrogant establishment, which thinks they can do whatever they want with impunity. And that world no longer exists. They can still do things, and they haven't been disarmed yet. But I think Glass-Steagall goes a long way toward disarming them. And people who think Glass-Steagall is just some technical regulatory language miss the point. If you take away the power these banks accrued since 1999 in terms of their global influence, they're mixing together shadow banking, hedge funds, and the largest banks in the world. If you take that away from them, that power away from them, you're creating a possibility for national governments to reassert themselves to defend their own people.
Right.
And that's what we mean by a sovereignty movement. Not that nation states are so great in themselves, but they do represent a capability to do what's right for their people. And if they do that, those governments will be popular.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Harley, we got about a minute left, man. Why don't you give out your contact information, how people can follow the work that you do, and as well as for LaRouche Pack?
Well, the first place to go is LaRouche Pack, so you can get the updated videos and discussions and news. But also, I'm beginning to get some communication with your listeners, and I noticed a couple of our programs are starting to take off. So if people want to get in touch with me personally, you can email me at harleysch@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But in the meantime, spread the word. The world has changed. We have an opportunity now to take that change and crush the globalists, crush the banksters.
Yep.
So we won't have to sit around and talk about how powerful they are and, oh, woe is me.
Exactly.
Instead, we can become a force on the planet that our nation was meant to be by its founding fathers.
Absolutely correct. Very well said, Harley. And with that, folks, we've come to the end of the program. This is another edition of Hanging with Harley, and I am your host, V, the Guerrilla Economist. Thank you all for listening in, and we'll be back next week about the same time, covering all sorts of issues and the latest news and what's on Harley's mind. With that being said, thank you all for listening and tuning in. Have a great day. Take it away, Steve.